Welcome everybody to a very special video requested by some of you in Discord, but also in the comments under my videos. And we're gonna talk today about how do I help myself to improve, to become better Magic player, or what steps I took to increase my value or improve my Magic skills in Magic the Gathering Arena. Mostly on standard based, you can of course apply some of the tips and some of the tricks I'm gonna share with you in Explorer, Historic, and all the other game modes that you're playing, maybe Brawl or Commander. And without a lot of chit chat, let's go straight into it. And I think one of the most important skills are to know what opening hand you keep, when to mulligan, and what are the considerations while you're making your decisions. And obviously we are talking here about a big advantage if you're going first, especially for an aggro deck. This is very decisive, but also the statistics overall show that going first in Magic the Gathering improves your win rate overall, regardless what deck you're playing. And important also here to understand that if you're playing first, you start your hand with 7 cards compared to your opponent who starts with 8 cards, because the next turn they're gonna be a draw step for your opponent. This is a key part also to decide to mulligan or to keep the hand, because if you are first going and you are gonna mulligan, you will be starting the game with 6 cards compared to 8 cards if your opponent keep of course his hand and is happy with it. So this can be a huge disadvantage, but again regarding on the deck that you are playing. And there I found is a really important thumb rule for aggro, midrange and control. For aggro you usually want to start with your 2 landers, and for midrange and control 3, maximum 4 lands are more than enough in your opening hand. And also depending on your curve, if you are going second and you have a spell that begins with 3 mana cost, this spell is not necessarily a game changer that gives you, for example, a lot of life against aggro decks or some other advantages against midrange or control decks, for example like Cheeky Bricky or Fable of the Mirror Breaker. Then in these scenarios I tend to mulligan, because it's just not worth it to start a game so late, and often you lose these games also. And this is where it's very important to know your deck, to know what you are building with, and this is why net decking is maybe something that not every people can do. Even if you are downloading or importing the most or highest win rate deck and you don't know what opening hand should this deck contain, or what you should keep and what you should mulligan, then it's of course really difficult for you to pilot this deck. This is why experience with each deck is very important, especially for this one of the most important decisions in the game. Do you keep the opening hand or do you mulligan? There are many very powerful and very important sources online that you can find regarding to keep or to mulligan. I will link one down in the description below that helped me. It's a really old one from tapandsec.com, and there are a lot of great articles, so if you are interested then just browse a little bit through the homepage or through the site. It will definitely help you to improve. The next point that helped me to improve in this game is to know the value of certain cards. I know there are value indicators with mythic, rare, commons, uncommons and so on, but they often do not indicate the value of the card and just represent the rarity. As an example here, Kumano Faces Kakazan, a 1 mana red drop, is just a pure value all over the place, a 1 mana investment for 1 damage to Planeswalker into your opponent's face, but also on chapter 2 it provides you with counters, so with bigger creatures, and chapter 3 provides you a 2/2 for 1 mana investment. This is a value overall that is important to understand, that this card must be in your red deck if you are pursuing these aggressive starts. And in general it's really also too important to understand that some cards provide you value, and usually again a thumb rule for this example is if a card lets you do something else when it enters the battlefield, or on the cast ability when you are casting it, this card usually catapults in value. But again, if a card can provide you, for example, something for free, there are a lot of cards that give you extra value, for example a free looting effect where you can just loot few cards deep, or maybe a creature that is really difficult to interact like Graveyard Trespasser. But also creatures that give you mana or usually be able to tap for mana are really powerful tools that we have available regarding or depending on your deck that you are trying to build or to play. So always, if you are validating or try to validate a card, if it's reasonable to craft or to utilize in your deck, think first about what is your deck trying to do and what is the most value you can get out for your mana investment. And historically speaking, the best value you get by ETB, so creatures or artifacts, enchantments, enter the the battlefield ability, this is what ETB stands for, or cards that provide you certain reach effects. And with reach I don't mean the ability to block flying creatures, but reach I mean an additional passive, if you want to describe it like this, to a card. For example, Menace is a reach effect, but also Sheldred with her Drain effect is a reach effect where you can influence the board state but also influence the life total of your opponent by doing nothing, just having the card on the board. So this sort of reach effects are really important, especially for mid-range decks. This is why you see maybe in current standard cards like Sheldred being very, very powerful. So keep your eyes open for the future cards like this, and if you see something like that, then just note it down and try this card out for your deck if it's really the greatest value that you can get out for the mana cost. The next point is something that I see the most people making the mistake, and me myself of course too, especially at the beginning of the game or where you are relatively new, and this is the ability to analyze the battlefield. But not only the battlefield, also graveyards from your opponent provides you extra value. This is why never underestimate the graveyard and the exile pile from your opponent to just get an understanding what can your opponent draw next. Maybe they have 3, maybe they have 4 copies of a certain card that they already used. So how do you approach into situations? And because of this analysis, and this is something I see a lot of mono red but also mono white player doing wrong, to understand who is the beatdown. What is a beatdown and who is a beatdown? There is a great article from Paulo Damavito da Rosa, ex-world champion, and I believe it was not an article, I think on his channel back then when he had his channel. He has a great video. If I find it, I will link it down in the description definitely, who describes amazingly how to understand who is the beatdown and in what case the beatdown can change while the game progresses. Especially if you are an aggro deck, I think it's really important to understand who is the beatdown and how you can overcome the game and turn it into your favor. Another point that belongs to analyzing the battlefield is to understand when do you play in your main phase and in your second main. I don't think I need to explain so detailed what are which phases, but you have a pre-combat phase and a post-combat phase where you can cast your sorceries but also your creature spells if they don't have flash. And funny enough, there are a lot of people who have different names for these phases. I usually call it the main and the second main phase, but some people call it pre-combat and post-combat phase, so it depends on who you are talking with and how these people learn the game. But for me, as I said, we will stay with main and second main. So to understand when do you play in your main phase and second main, I think the current standard meta is a really good spot for it. For example, if you have a lot of combat tricks or a lot of interactions with your creatures but also with your opponent's creatures, for example, like the toxic decks that are currently played, there is really important to keep the mana and the protection interaction and also combat tricks that can provide you extra value if opponent tries to interact with your creatures or tries to block and do not expect a combat trick. There is important to start with the mana or to attack with the mana available to cast these spells or to cast these combat tricks. But also, especially against control, it's really important maybe not to cast your 3-drop on curve on your main phase and then it has a summoning sickness and the opponent points the removal towards your 3-drop and your 1 or 2-drop maybe connect for 1 or 2 damage, but maybe save it up for your second main phase. So if opponent is scared of the life loss of the smaller creature, he uses his removals on the smaller creatures and you can drop your 3-drop and it will stay alive. And the most of these tips will come down to one thing, and I will present this one thing at the end of the video because I think this is the most important thing that helped me to improve over time, so definitely stay tuned for it. The next trick is maybe you can something utilize in paper better, but it's also possible in the arena utilize it, and this is the mind games. I compared Magic often to other card games, for example like poker. Me myself used to play a lot of poker with my friends, and in Magic is a very similar philosophy of how to win a game by bluffing or just present something that you don't have available, but make your opponent think that you have the spells or you have the ability to do exactly that what you are trying to emulate or simulate in the situation. The best example here is counter spells, interactions, but also things like Wandering Emperor. It can be a game-changing approach if you play something or maybe you attack with something and expect your opponent to react to something that you are bluffing and to not block, and you bring 1 or 2 damage in, that exactly wins you the game at the end. But also there are some small tricks in the arena, for example, to put the hold phases action on your opponent's main phases, and when he casts something it will call the game for you or give you the priority to interact with something, even if you don't have anything in your hand, but opponent will maybe think that you have some interaction, some counter spells, Wandering Emperor, and so on. Especially in the lower tiers, this is a really game-changing mechanic that you can utilize in arena for yourself, and a lot of people will try to play around it. I had multiple games where I didn't have my Wandering Emperor, playing with my mono white deck, and the opponent was not attacking me because they were scared that I will flash in my Wandering Emperor and exile the Sheoldred or other big threats that could easily go in for a lot of damage. This is why always take your time, think about what is your opponent thinking, and try to manipulate a game that opponent thinks that you have something that you maybe don't even run in your deck. Similar to putting the hold on opponent's phases, you can also utilize the full control. You activate full control on the PC by clicking the control button or pushing the control button. And I believe on mobile, I'm not sure about it, correct me if I'm wrong, by double tapping your player icon, you're activating the full control, and this way, every time a cast been cast, even if you have nothing to interact with or to play with, it will produce a priority hold, so you can interact with something by not even having something to interact. This will make for your opponent really difficult to understand what is currently in your hand and how to play around it. This is also why a lot of players you see maybe in the World Cups or other scenarios in other big tournaments, but also me myself, if you draw at the end just lands or you have just lands, maybe don't make your land draw, because this will indicate that you can maybe have some counter spells or some interaction for your opponent that will influence your opponent's decisions on how they approach and how they are playing against you, and this can be a game-winning knowledge that you gain there. And the next things that help me to improve is definitely knowing the current meta. This is why I enjoy Standard, because Standard is not such a wide amount of cards that are used in this set, and also I find Standard being more simple but also in the same time very complex and very versatile makes it so interesting for me. But knowing the top 5 current played decks is very important to understand how to beat them, and there is always this saying in Magic, if you cannot beat them, join them, and I cannot stress it more than enough. If people are annoyed from control players, from mono blue, from counterspell players, or mono red or other decks that just run over you, then join them. Try to build the deck as good as possible, play it and see which decks beating you. This is the main focus. You should try to not enjoying to play this deck, but to understand how did my opponent beat me, why didn't I have a chance, and why did I had a chance. And as soon as you start understanding it, it will be an easy game for you to understand how to approach certain situations. You will have it in mind, my opponent beat me last time when I played mono blue this way, so if you face a mono blue opponent, you will know exactly how to approach these games to beat the mono blue player and not getting stressed out or depressed because they counter all your spells. This is why I always recommend to check out some news sources. For me, it's Twitter, but I know not a lot of people have the time for using Twitter. For example, MTG Arena Zone is also a great news source for this sort of things. They show you what are the top decks, who wins what, and what are the cards are played. But also there are some YouTubers, for example, MTG Joe, I will link his channel down in the description, has an amazing breakdown of the current played cards each week. I think multiple times he brings it for Explorer, Historic, Standard. I usually watch only the Standard because I'm interested in it, but I want to know what is played in this week the most, what has the win rate, and how to counter it or how to play or approach against these decks. And if I face these decks on the ladder, I usually exactly know what is their turn 2, turn 3, turn 4 play, and how I need to approach these decks to have the greatest value or to win these games more effectively. I believe nowadays with YouTube and all this information, social media sources that we have is a really powerful source that we have available that was not there, let's say 20 years ago, that you need to buy some journals to just see how is mono green performing or how does the artifact or spell slinger deck performing, to find out how to fight against these spells, what cards are really good against it. But nowadays I think by watching YouTube, watching for example my channel, watching a lot of other channels will help you to understand what is currently played, what is the meta, how to approach this meta and how to win against it. But always keep in mind, if you cannot beat them, just join them, so play the same deck as you are struggling against to understand how to beat this deck the best. And my last and final tip, and this is actually how I came to content creation or how I came to YouTube to bring out my decks, is record your gameplay. Sadly, Magic the Gathering Arena do not provide us tools to really support your learning curve. For example, like a lot of other competitive games, here's Counter-Strike, for example, a really great example that provides you a lot of tools to improve, not only with the replay function, but also you can revisit some of the games, check exactly how did my opponent approach it, how did I approach it, where did I make the mistakes, and how to improve it in the future, because you will have the same scenarios over and over again, especially in Magic. The card pool in Standard is a really limited card pool. This is why you will be facing similar situation where you make maybe some mistakes very often. This is why download the free software. It's OBS. I can link it down in the description. With OBS, it's really simple to record your games and then go through these games. This is how I did it for almost 2 years before I start content creation. I recorded a lot of my games, and especially the ones that I lost, I was rewatching them back and seeing, okay, why did I make this decision? It happens still today if I watch my own videos and I think like, why did I make this decision on turn 3, not keeping the mana open even though my opponent is the beatdown? So if I consider all the previous factors, I understand that I made a major misplay that lead to a loss in this game, and this is why when this situation comes up again, I try to improve, and with the time, this is the greatest tool that is gonna help you to improve in the game. Record your games, check out all your losses. Every time you lose, let's say you play 10 games, you lost 5 of them. At the end of the day, if you have some time, or fire up the order where you save your OBS saved games and check out each game, okay, why did I lose here or there? You can also do it by a game by game scenario. If you lost against something and then you say, oh, I want to see why did I lose against it? Did my opponent just had an amazing draw? Did I made some major mistakes? Could I have been playing better? Because you already know what the game outcome is and what your opponent gonna approach, you will be much more critical to your choices on turn 2, turn 3, turn 4, and so on. And this will help you, I guarantee you, help you in the next game to improve, and you will win suddenly much more than you did before you've been recording and analyzing your own gameplay. And this is it, my friends. Those are the top things that help me to improve in the game. I know I'm not the best player, but I think I have a certain skill level that gives me the advantage in a lot of my matchups. With a lot of really underpowered decks, I can be able to defeat the most meta decks, and I think this is something that you learn with the game, with the skill. Never forget that Magic is a chance game, so there is nothing that will give you 100% win. There is always a chance to win. And you can always get mana flooded, you can always get mana starved, you can always have really bad draws, or your opponent gonna get amazing draws. But if you try to utilize the most of these tricks that I just shared with you, from now on, from today, I believe it will help you to improve as a player, regardless what deck you're playing, regardless what cards you are using. And then if you jump up on a really powerful meta deck, for example, you will see how hardly you will improve. Because, for example, if I play now my Esper Legends, that is not even a net deck, it's just inspired from the tournaments. I made a lot of changes to these decks, and still, if I try to utilize this deck, I understand how easy this game can be to win, because you use such a powerful deck with all the knowledge that you have and all the skills. You can go almost infinite without any issues. I hope you enjoyed this sort of videos. If you did, let me know down in the comments. And if I miss a point, also just inform me, maybe I can edit later. And if you're interested in some other videos like this, just let me know. I'm always open for new ideas and new inspirations for the content that is out there. But for now, I thank you for your time. I hope you liked most of these tricks, or it will be helpful for you in your future games. And as always, I hope to see you in the next one. Ciao!